Hello, hello, everyone. So good to be with you in community today to talk about just love. My name is Hamida Bhagarati, pronouns she, her, hers, and I'm going to start us off, but the six folks you see on the screen are going to be collaborating throughout our time together. So it is 12:05. As we move into the space, leaving behind maybe work, tending to ourselves and others, some of the lightness and perhaps heaviness of the day. Let's take a really slow, at your own pace, collective deep breath, slowly inhaling deeply, and then slowly releasing it at your own pace. And I noticed that Ananya is with us, and I just want to give a shout out that she is one of the folks who was at the inception of Centering Justice. And she created the legacy of taking a deep breath at the very beginning of our cycle. So thank you. So I join you today from Ypsilanti on the unceded and occupied lands of the Anishinaabeg, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi, the three council fires of Michigan, the Sauk and the Fox and the Wyandotte, and land in which contemporary Indigenous peoples continue to live and thrive and contribute to our collective uplift. So today's topic is just love. And knowing throughout the decades and hundreds of years, these Native and Indigenous communities have loved, have forgiven, have mended relationships, have rejoiced, have redeemed each other. We'll be spending some time thinking about how do we love and forgive, mend, and redeem. To do a little bit of grounding about centering justice, some of you may be very familiar and some of you may be newer to our community. Welcome. We started as a program at the very top of the pandemic, really intending to amplify BIPOC voices and really uplift the work that is happening in communities of color to keep moving through towards past challenges and towards change that still uplifts and builds up communities in light of capitalist and white supremacist actions where all of a sudden BIPOC communities became even more invisible. And as we've sort of evolved, we realized that this need to uplift BIPOC voices from amongst folks in our community exists beyond just a reaction to COVID. It's so much more than a reaction. And so where we ground ourselves now is inviting visionaries, storytellers, doers, and healers that interrupt the status quo and that who will inspire us to believe and act to create a more just and thriving society. And I just also want to uplift two of my new accomplices that you'll be hearing in our section. Yodeep Mason-Johnson, News President and CEO, and Carly Frederick, our Programs Associate, who's also incredible at just keeping things going. She's also our DJ, so DJ Frederick, thank you. Along with that, just so thankful to have Dwight, Maria, and Hsiao-Wen with us. So Dwight L. Wilson, pronouns he, him, is an author of historical fiction, including Essie Was My Mother. His other creative works include books of haiku, short stories, and guidance in spiritual development. The latter draws connections to Dwight's faith. He is an African-American Quaker who holds a Master's of Divinity. Dwight has also served in a number of academic roles, including as headmaster, president, and dean of students. He also served as founding executive director of New Jersey nonprofit. A family man, Dwight is a proud father of 7 and devoted husband. Welcome, Dwight. We also have Maria Thomas, pronouns she, her, hers, joining us. Maria Thomas is a queer, brown, multiply displaced immigrant. She grew up between India, the so-called Middle East, and Michigan. She is an artist, poet, and organizer. Maria's current work focuses on interrupting criminalization in medical care and public health spaces. She is committed to drawing the connections between the violence of policing and imperialism, as she feels the long shadow of both in her life. She believes the work of building new worlds is joyful when we get to do it together and with care and tenderness. Welcome. And we also have Hsiao-Wen Lo, pronounced she, her, hers, joining us. Hsiao-Wen Lo, PhD, is a licensed psychologist in Michigan and owns a private practice in Ann Arbor. She works with clients of diverse identities, including age, race, gender, and more. She has worked in community health, including domestic violence, university counseling, and more. Hsiao-Wen also works with people trying to create inclusive living, learning, and working environments. These services include consultation, workshops, and public speaking. Drawing on her background, she helps clients make sustainable change. Thank you so much for joining us today. To reground us before I move on over and give Yodit some space, what brings us here together today? Just love. So as Bell Hooks reminds us, the practice of love is the most powerful antidote to the politics of domination. Love is joyous and generous. Love is personal and political. Love is restorative and accountable. Love allows us to wholly honor each other, both our best selves and the parts of us that are still growing. Achieving justice in the world we envision requires community care and love. How do these emerge within ourselves, in our society, and our organizations? And I'll pass it on to Yodi to give us some further grounding.
Yeah, we hope our new ancestor Bell is continuing to watch over us and inspire us with their wisdoms. Good afternoon. I'm gonna take a little bit more time than my allotted 5 minutes, and I'm gonna name that because I think love requires some spaciousness and some time. And I wanna come at it in a few ways. But first, I wanna honor my mother, who also is an ancestor, Cassandra Johnson Levitt, who first taught me love. My mother wrote songs for me that now I've written for my son. I can remember our nose kisses, where she would kiss my nose and I would kiss hers. I can remember deeply knowing, and I know it even more now, how loved I was. And home wasn't perfect, but love was undeniable. And that was a gift, a root that got planted for me by her and by the village that surrounded us. And when I think of, I refer to him as Baba Dwight, you are to only call him Dwight, and how he holds newborns in the hospital and how foundational it is to be in the arms of someone who sees you and honors your humanity even before you know your name. That's why I'm glad Dwight is here, and what that means and what that felt like for me. And I'm also very aware that far too many, including many of you probably with us today, did not grow up in a home like that. And so I'm aware that that is a privilege. And the love I received wasn't just love in the amorous form we think of. It was correction and accountability, and at times what some might call tough love, but love was definitely a verb. And that early love was foundational in shaping what is now love, a guiding principle, a way of being, a politic for me. And honestly, before we jumped on, I was saying to the team that love is also what challenges me most. And I feel that tension in my body today. I have a foot in creative destruction of lovelessness and the things that rob us of love and our capacity for it, and another foot rooted in a future that is filled with care and love. And I remember when I got married that the preacher recited and repeated the words of the of 1 Corinthians. And I want to just bring us to that as foundational for this conversation, love within ourselves. And part of that scripture reads that, if I speak in tongues of men and angels, but have not love, I'm a noisy or a clanging cymbal. And even if I have prophetic powers and understand all the mysteries and all the knowledge, and yet have no faith, so as to remove mountains, I am nothing. And if I gave away all that I had, hello, charity, and if I delivered my body to be burned, but I have not love, I gain nothing. And my then husband and I were repeating over and over these scriptures. If I gave away all that I had. And finally, the preacher comes to a reminder, an admonition that love is patient and it's kind and it doesn't envy or boast and it's not arrogant or rude and it does not insist in its own way. It's not irritable or resentful. It doesn't rejoice at wrongdoing, but rather truth, and that it bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things. And finally, we repeated, love never ends, it suffers long. And he closes this part of our ceremony with, so now faith, hope, and love abide, but the greatest of these is love. And I remember feeling how heavy that was, and the collective trauma that my partner and I brought into our marriage would mean that ultimately, even though we had said and deeply believed those scriptures, that our marriage would not sustain. We did not suffer long. Thankfully, though, we continue now to find new and different ways for love to unfurl in struggle and in the constraints of our individual limitations. And that love we share was buoyed by the transformational power and love of our children. Our first daughter, Jada, who passed shortly after she was born, taught us that love is courage. And our baby, our 12-year-old baby, Tyson, who many of you hear about often because he broke us wide open and helped us to understand that love is unconditional. And neither of us, I think, have really experienced that in our lives. That unconditional love is a love that is radically different than anything I've ever known or experienced in my nearly 50 years. And so, we've talked about love at the individual level and at the familial level and even interpersonally. And in their piece titled The Need for Radical Love in Social Justice and Human Rights, Sangat, the author of the piece, notes that it's become essential for us to talk about love because we're being engulfed by hate and othering and violence of all kinds, including against our land, as Hamida mentioned, and against Mother Nature. And all hierarchies, conflicts, and violence in the world, they believe, are because of the love of power. We love our power and destroy nature. Men love their power and dominate women and non-binary folk, dominate caste, races, and corporates, love power and pushing us down. And love of power rules and destroys this earth, and can only be countered by the power of love, a love so big and so radical and so growing from the root that it can lead to the transformation that we long for and not just tinkering. It is radical and powerful, and it can deepen and enlarge us. And this radical and just love that we speak of is non-dualistic and non-binary. It really is based on the notion of interdependence and interconnectedness and coexistence. And as I mentioned, I think that it is, we've talked a lot about the impacts of white supremacy, the impacts of colonization, the water that we've been swimming in. And most people today, the author writes, are aching and pining to get love, to be understood and affirmed. And there is so much violence all around us, they say, because we are without love. And finally, radical love. what I hope we can talk about today, this just love, is no perfect lover. We improve it as we practice. And today I hope that we can learn from our guest that we are not, in practicing love, becoming doormats to the oppressor. It doesn't mean that an unconditional consent or access or even solidarity without critique is not a free pass, but it is and can be the basis of restoration and repair. And today, that's what I hope we get a chance to lean into. Carly, can I throw it over to you to bring our guest into space?
Absolutely, Yodit. And thank you for sharing that. You had me at nose kisses and good morning wake up songs with your mom. Before the session, we were talking about we might need some tissues, and I think I'm already there. You moved me. Yeah, so as always, we want to invite our speakers to bring their full selves into the space. So with that in mind, I'd like to ask each of you to tell us about the communities and identities that you're drawing upon as you enter this space. And Hsiao-Wen, are you comfortable maybe going first?
Yes. So the identities that I'm drawing upon as I enter this space are, so I am an immigrant born and raised in Taiwan, and I came to the US as an adult in 1995. I lived in Illinois, Massachusetts, Oklahoma, Michigan, New York, and back to Michigan. And I now see both Ann Arbor and Taipei, my home, and both the US and Taiwan, my country. I speak 3 languages, English being my third, and being multilingual shapes the ways I understand words and process information, and I find that important to bring into the space as well. I also identify as queer, mostly able-bodied, cisgender woman of color of Asian descent, with a mix of Buddhist and Taoist upbringing and Christian influence. I also bring in my identity as a psychologist with knowledge about human emotions, behaviors, and cognition. And so that's how I am showing up today.
We could perhaps hear from Maria and then Dwight.
Hey, everyone. Just first of all, gratitude to all of the organizers, Yodit, Hamida, Carly, for bringing us together, and for everyone who is taking time to be with us, to have this conversation together. I know that time is a gift and your presence is too. So just thank you for that. My name is Maria Thomas. I am a South Asian, I think in the intro you heard, I often identify as a queer, brown, multiply displaced immigrant. I moved here to the States in 2004, so as an adult. And, you know, I have a complicated relationship and perhaps certain feelings about the word refugee, but I will say this, I feel like that word conceals the horrific violence that leads to people taking refuge. And so I will often instead say I was displaced by war as a child. And that was a formative experience that has shaped my worldview and the people I feel kinship with. I feel kinship and a tenderness for folks in exile, for folks who have been uprooted for any variety of reasons. That said, I also feel a deep kinship with anyone fighting shoulder to shoulder for liberation. I often quote one of my favorite poets, Aga Shahid Ali. He's a Kashmiri poet. And he talks about, even though he's moved and has been displaced and uprooted, he has not learned the way of the nomad, to walk between raindrops to keep dry. So I think there's this sense that I have of the rain that falls on you, falls on me. We hold each other up, we keep fighting, we keep loving, we keep growing together. I'm an artist, I'm a poet, I I love to dance and sing and do all kinds of creative things. That's a big part of my identity and how I make sense of the world. And I'm an organizer because I feel like the worlds we yearn for, we can actually in the present organize to create. I'm the mother of 3 amazing kids as well, who teach me so much every day. And just sending a lot of love to my friends on this call and the people, my friends that I don't know, who have taught me a lot about love. Thank you.
Shall I go? My mother got pregnant with me when she was 16. Unlike Zeus's children, who are supposed to have sprung from his head, my mother had a mate, and it was my father, and they had a shotgun wedding that my grandfather forced them to have, but at the same time boycotted. What she knew more than anything else was that she had a Black baby coming. So I am first Black. I'm a Quaker, going back to the first generation of Quakers. William Penn was first cousins with one of my ninth grade grandmothers. But more than anything else, I'm a daddy. And I have 4 sons. I wanted a girl every single time. They know that, but I wouldn't send either one of them back. So they're cool with it. My father used to say there's more than one way to skin a cat. You may have heard that analogy. It doesn't sound too Quakerly, but anyway. I figured, what can I do to fill this spot? So I have over 60 of my former students who have daughter status, which means that I would do the same thing for them that I would do for my sons. And nobody said, can I be your daughter? And some of them didn't even know that I considered them to be my daughter. The only requirement is that you be young enough to be my daughter. So I have umpteen sisters too. So I'm this father who, at a very, very early age, said to myself, I'm going to be an ancestor. Now, I was in my teens when I said it. I decided that I wanted to be an ancestor because my father's father had left my grandmother with 5 kids in the middle of the Depression. He had not sent back a dime or a postcard. My father never heard from him again. I found my grandfather when I was about 29, 30 years old. And he gave me the lamest excuse in the world for why he left my grandmother. He said it was during the Depression and I couldn't find work and I knew she was a strong woman. Now, as far as I was concerned, I never wanted to see him again. That was, and I never did either. That was sufficient. You're going to leave somebody to fend for herself because she's strong and you want to go off and do something else. He remarried. He had 3 kids, put all 3 of them through college and graduate school. My father only went to 7th grade because he was kicked out for being too smart to be a Negro, whatever that means. And my mother was kicked out of school because she was pregnant with me. So it was natural that I went into education to try to make it a fair and even playing ground. So I spent 41 years as an educator, but I also became a minister before I turned 18. So since that was in 1966. So here I am straining to be an ancestor, and you can't be an ancestor if you don't show up. My grandfather didn't show up as a Wilson. My father rarely showed up as a Wilson. I'm wearing Wilson sneakers right now. I have a Wilson book bag. I have Wilson shirts. I have a Wilson hat to remind myself it is your responsibility to redeem this world, to redeem this name. One of my sons said to me about his sons, he said, Daddy, why is it so important to you to be a good grandfather? I said, babe, and this is the first time I'd ever said it. One generation is an aberration. 2 is a trend. 3 is a broken cycle. I need my grandchildren to be good people before I can say that this name is redeemed. So I'm going to be there for them, just like I was for you all. I believe very much in social justice. I always have believed in social justice. I worked on, I was a human rights commissioner here in Ann Arbor for about 9 years. When Black Lives Matter came to the Human Rights Commission and said after Orr Rosser was murdered, I said murder. After Orr Rosser was murdered, that we needed to do something because we had no police oversight commission and there were not going to be any charges brought. And they looked at me and said, will you chair it? They said, do you want to chair it? I didn't want to chair it. But like I said, you can't be an ancestor if you don't show up. So I chaired it, and I chaired it for 4.5 years. We finally got an ordinance, and we have an oversight commission. It's not what I want it to be, but they were fighting all the way against it. Power does not give up power with ease. And if you think that it does, I won't even go there. So I'm still working on police oversight. When Breonna Taylor was killed in Louisville, the next day I was contacted to try to help them in Louisville. I've helped a number of different communities across the country, and some of them have been successful, and others just quit. And it seemed to them like there was peace. Détente is not peace. Justice is peace. How we help ourselves sustain our love so that we will bring the justice. That's what I'm all about. So I'm going to stop right there because I can talk from now on, and I don't want to do that.
Dwight, thank you so much for sharing that. That was a sermon. I want to sit for a moment in that before I move to our question. So just love brought us here. We've been talking about love. We haven't yet shared how we define or think of love. So how about we start off with, what does love mean to you? How do you define it? And Dwight, since you were last, let's make you first. Could you share?
One of my former mentors was named Betty Ann Workman. And Betty Ann used to say all the time, we teach who we are. She's been dead 7-8 years. I internalized what she said and I teach who I am. I grew up in a household where my father beat my mother in front of us. One of my earliest memories is him pulling a gun on her. I was 3 and her begging for her life. Well, he used to say he loved her all the time. And she would say, your daddy loves you in his own way. Well, that's not how I define love. I don't define love by beating somebody. And I never raised a hand on my kids, but I did discipline them. There are other ways to discipline besides using violence. And as a Quaker, it was important to me to find those ways. And I did that before I even realized that we had Quakerism in our heritage. So I try to help people celebrate discipline. That's what love looks like to me. It's celebrating discipline. If I don't discipline myself, I don't write. So I try to write every morning, and I try to write during the day. Love looks to me like I never try to hurt you, but I also don't lie to you. So if you're doing something that is harmful to the community, the common unity, as I like to break up the word, if you're doing something that hurts yourself, you're breaking the love. Nothing feeds my love more than holding babies, which I do every Monday morning and have since 2011 in a pediatric cardiology ward, where we know we're going to lose at least 30 a year. But these babies are coming straight from the Holy One. They don't know anything but love and trust. I have to bring positive energy into that space. You don't bring negativity into a space where a baby who is helpless needs you to help them do the best they can to make it through this pain. Love looks to me like living it. Conversation is totally irrelevant. Totally irrelevant. I have friends who have been close to me for 40, 50 years. I have no idea if they belong to a religion or not. It's irrelevant. Do they love? That's what love looks like. It's like you're there, you care, you're not going to hurt me. This is a safe space. This is all positive energy. And that's not new wave bull. It's living it. And that goes for those who consider themselves to be my enemies, because I don't consider anybody my enemy. You may be my opponent, but you are not my enemy. We're on this trail together as pilgrims. And nobody gets out of it alive, as Richard Pryor said. He used some colorful language, more colorful than I'm going to use, but it's in my head.
Hsiao-Wen or Maria, what's love look like for you, Maria? By the way, you look like love to me. You are love. I'm so here.
Dwight, what you were saying about love is living it really, really resonates with how I see and define, how I perceive love. It is action. It is practice. It isn't conversation. It isn't talk. It is living it. There's this quote by Cornel West that I really love that embodies what I think of when I think of love, which is this idea that justice is what love looks like in public. Justice, to me, is love. When everyone is fed, when everyone has their needs met, like that is all love. When everyone feels connected and cared for, has that loving embrace as a baby, but also as an adult. That is love. And so when I said I'm an organizer, I'll also add the qualifier that I'm an abolitionist organizer, because I think that is the loving and caring future that we need to continue to build. And what I mean by that is we need to dismantle institutions and spaces that rob us of our ability to love and stay connected. Detention centers, prisons, all of these things are places that are designed to torture, to separate, and to crush the spirit, to crush our connections, to sever our ties, to distance ourselves from the most divine and loving part of ourselves, because these are things that keep love from flourishing. And so I'm thinking right now, especially of a beloved loved one of mine who is in Huron Valley right now, which is the women's correctional facility. Let's be clear, there's, that's a euphemism. There's no correcting, there's no redemption, there's nothing of that sort that's happening there. It is just imposed coercive punishment and suffering that those institutions are designed to do. But what I know from conversations and communion with her is that it's not safe to give or receive love in such places. And we need to have and build a society where we can all fully love. And that means taking apart brick by brick institutions that would deny us of that right. For those of you unfamiliar with what it is like to try to stay in touch with someone in such a cold and hard place, and the valiant efforts despite all of that people still are able to hold on to love. I mean, that is the most inspiring thing. But we're talking 15-minute phone calls that then you have to sort of wait another 15 minutes before you can have another 15-minute phone call, no visitation with COVID, being locked down in yourself for up to 23 hours. I mean, to me, as a society, if we are to love, we would not be able to live with ourselves, knowing that our concept of dealing with harm is to just disappear people into places that send them to premature death. Like this is something that cannot coexist with love. It just cannot. So, and the thing is, any attempt, you're not allowed touch, you're not allowed hugs, you're not, the amount of sensory deprivation of these kinds of torture chambers just cannot be fathomed. And so, part of what I define love as is dismantling such institutions and building other ways of addressing harm. I believe in holding each other, in the possibility of redemption. I believe no one is disposable. And I think there are far more effective ways to address violence and harm rather than just dislocating that violence behind closed doors and behind bars. That's all it is. It's a dislocation of violence into concentrated forms of it. So what I want when I think about love is to create spaces where we can all more fully accept and give love, when the love you have for someone is not used against you, which is often what happens for folks who are incarcerated, right? Any attempt to reach out, any attempt to love is given a disciplinary ticket. Any sign that you want to stay connected with the outside world and want to be or do something different, all of that is used as leverage to punish you further. I can go on and on about this, but one last thing I'll close with, as I think about my own personal definitions for love, is just this idea of love as interconnectedness. June Jordan, who is my favorite poet, talks about, in her theorem on love, this short poem, Bell's Theorem, she says, there is no chance that we will fall apart. There is no chance. There are no parts. And so love is acknowledging that inherent interconnectedness and taking a hammer to all of the things that disrupt that. Which is kind of a contradiction in terms when I'm talking about love and I'm like, take a hammer to the things that disrupt that. But also, I mean, I do think that self-determination, self-defense, all of those things also come from a deep place of love. And so I hold those contradictions as I'm talking about this. And I'll end there.
Hsiao-Wen.
I came across a quote by Angela Davis, who was talking about radical, which I loved. And that quote says, radical means grasping things at the root. And so oftentimes when I think about radical, I think about that. And so when we were asked to think about our personal definition of love, I think about what is at the root of the word love. And so this is how I define it. I define it as an emotion. I define it as an action that nurtures, grows, connects, supports, listens, sees, understands, protects, assures, soothes, heals, believes in, trusts, encourages, affirms, appreciates, acknowledges, respects, shares, uplifts, and speaks truth. So for me, then that is the root of love. And from there, that's I then grow this plant. And I look forward to the next question, where then I will have the opportunity to share with you this plant that I have grown.
Thanks. Already so much wisdom and space to grow into this conversation. Maria, as you were talking about prison abolition, you made me think about a podcast I was listening to with Prentice Hill and Mariam Kaba. And one of the things that sort of pierced my heart, and I want to use this maybe to invite the next question, was the ways in which there is room to acknowledge our complicity in punishing, in wanting revenge, in in the punitive systems that we also these institutions that you speak of, right? I was drawing the connection between the institution and the personal and the political, right? Which Audre Lorde reminds us that the personal is political. But for me, even to like the love and care that you help us to imagine and envision requires me to have, to be honest about the parts of me that when I have been harmed, want revenge, want to punish, want suffering from the person or systems that enacted that harm, right? And needing to have space, one, to like work that out and in community with others, to name that truth, right? And then to be poured into, which is really where our next question leads to. You know, when there's been an uptick in interest in restorative and transformative justice, right? And one of the tenets of transformative justice is like accountability, right? It is, I mean, it's care, but it also calls us to accountability, but accountability doesn't have to be punishment or prison, or there are other things available to us. It recognizes our wholeness, right? And that this love you all speak of does require, Hsiao-Wen, the uprooting of the internalized violence too, right? So the question that I'm sort of holding, and I really want to invite you to enter this as you see fit, right? Like this is my question. Your answer can be very different, but we know that our lived experience of trauma, also of joy, right? And our humanity often makes our love conditional, right? And I wonder sort of how can we find, Hsiao-Wen, accountability, forgiveness, redemption within that accountability? How do we get there? Hsiao-Wen.
Indeed, I don't have a ready answer for that. Although here is what I usually do. Since what I had shared with you about the definition of love, that's what I believe that I do. So that's usually then what I return to. Is when I am with this person that has caused harm to me or to others. So what is it that I can do that will speak truth, that will understand, because they need to be understood. They're not hurt people, right? And so if we don't understand them and we don't believe in their humanity, we're really not loving them. And so I will go there before I then imagine what redemption will look like, what accountability will look like, what forgiveness will look like.
What's coming up for others?
Maria, you want me to go? Or you want to go?
No, go for it, Dwight.
Okay. When I write, I try to write within instead of about. I try to live my life within my emotions rather than within my mind. So I'm going to give an example of looking at forgiveness, redemption, and accountability in my life. I shared with you that my father abused my mother, but he abused us too, his children too. She died at 44. She gave me everything that she could have given me. She reversed all kinds of lies about who we as a people are, convinced me that I am as good as anyone, even though everything in American culture tries to tell me that as a Black male, I am no thing. But if she would have told me that the sky is purple and it has yellow dots, I would have believed it. So she flipped that switch when I was 5. She died at 44 years old. Broke my heart in so many ways, and I'm still suffering from it. I had a full fellowship to get my doctorate, but she was dying. And I decided rather than take that fellowship, I would take a position that was close enough so that I could help her die. No regrets ever about that. A dear friend of mine said that my mother's cancer was probably helped by all the stress she was under being married to my father and being beaten and him disappearing for days, weeks at a time, not knowing how she was going to feed the kids. All of the girlfriends that he had, being stabbed by one of his girlfriends who saw him on the street with another girlfriend, it being in it, all of that stuff. So when my father was dying, I said to my ex-wife, all my brothers and sisters are there, but I'm the oldest, and they're in the hospital. He'd had a stroke. I said, I have to go back. She said, he's never been there for you. He's never been there for you. Why do you have to go? And I broke down crying, and I said, I deserved it, Daddy. And all while I was growing up, I said to myself, if I were in his position, I would not act the way he is. So, who am I? I have enough forgiveness. Can I have enough faith in redemption to say, okay, I'm going to drop my job and I'm going to take my family and we are going to be there. So we went back. When I got to the hospital, my father had already died. My brothers and sisters and I had agreed we were going to be there at 11:45. All of us got there at 11:45. Daddy died at 10:35. I mean at 11:35. 11:45 we we're going to be there. He died at 11:35. He'd never been early in his life. Always late. It's like this man knew what was going on. He knew he'd never been there for us, and he did not want us to be there for him. Okay. So we're sitting there, and so many times I do the eulogies in the family. So many times I said to myself, I can say anything about Daddy and it'll be true. Because he's the sweetest person in the world, but he can be the meanest person in the world. He can do anything for you. He can steal money from his own children. You say whatever you want to say. That's Daddy. So one of my brothers said to me while we're sitting there, and Daddy's dead, days in rigor mortis on the bed, and the nurse had just let us sit in the room. And my brother said, Dwight, don't say anything bad about Daddy at the funeral. What? And the rest of them are shocked. Like, he's telling Dwight what not to say. And I took it as like, this is God speaking through him. So when I wrote out his funeral, and I've never written anybody else's out, and I only looked at the good things. And in only looking at the good things, I saw what my mother saw in him. If you strip away the negatives and you only look at the good, you can see. So I hold him accountable. And I wanted to be there so he could have a shot at saying, I'm sorry for what I did. I wanted him to have that opportunity. He refused it. There's nothing I can do. I can forgive him. I'm going to be totally honest with you. I can forgive him for all that he did to me. He'd have to say to me that he is sorry for what he did to my mother for me to be able to forgive him for that. I don't just pass out forgiveness like I'm passing out a handbill on the corner. You can't continue to do evil and say that you're already forgiven. And you know, there's part of Christianity that says that. You're forgiven before you do anything. I don't even believe, please. That is an oppressor's theology. That is an oppressor's theology. You have to be sincere, and your sincerity is in your behavior. I'm going to stop.
Wait, one more time. Say that one more time.
For me to forgive you, you have to be sincere. And your sincerity is in your behavior. Because that's what love is to me. Love is behavior. It's not something I'm just passing out because it's cheap. Love is not cheap. Anybody tell you love is cheap, they are a liar and the truth is not in them. That's another one of my favorite phrases.
Come on now. Let's get Maria in here. Thank you, Baba. Thank you.
Yes. Wow. Dwight, what you were saying about you have to be sincere, and that sincerity is reflected in behavior, and that's what's going to lead to forgiveness. It's reminding me of Mia Mingus, who's this transformative justice practitioner. And she talks about the 4 components of accountability, which is sort of related to your question, Yodi. And the 4 components are self-reflection, apology, like a sincerely meant apology, repair, and changed behavior. Those are the 4 components. You self-reflect, you offer a sincerely meant apology, but that means nothing if you haven't also repaired and changed your behavior, so you don't keep repeating this. And the thing about accountability, I think, at least in the context of transformative justice, it's not something that you can coerce. It's not, I mean, oftentimes in the common language or the common parlance, people will say, we have to hold so-and-so accountable. And that is coded language for they have to be punished, they have to be exiled, they have to be banished, right? But you cannot, and again, this is the punitive culture that we're swimming in. You cannot force accountability on someone through these coercive threats of punishment and adding more suffering, because that's not really going to break the cycle. Accountability is something that has to be taken on by each individual as an act of love for yourself, for holding to your values and embodying them, and as an act of love for the community you're part of, where you want to repair harms that you've done. Daniel Serad, who's another transformative justice practitioner, talks about, accountability is the corollary to grief for those who have caused harm. Right? What's the way out if you've done something horrible and you want to come back from it? If we hold true that no one is accountable, we have to have some way to invite folks back who have done harm. And it's not like there are bad people who do harm and there are good people who never do harm. Everybody does harm. Everybody is at the receiving end of harm. We are all human. How do we be human together? How do we create conditions for our maximum humanity? And then if we create that space and create those conditions, then we can all offer that accountability from ourselves, because it's an internal resource, not something that you just say, you're going to do this. We're going to set you on the right path or else. We're going to lock you up in a cage. That's not accountability, and it doesn't work. So that's one thing I'll say. Another thing, Yodi, just feeling your energy and your sincerity and your love. I also want to say you cannot force forgiveness. Like, take the time to heal. You deserve to feel everything you feel. We all do. You cannot force that forgiveness. You just also cannot base policy on it. It is very legitimate to be feeling all kinds of feelings when you were deeply harmed. That is natural. We are human. But to then have that lead to institutions that rely on perpetual punishment to rid us of these legitimately felt healings isn't the way to go, because we're just re-entrenching cycles of harm. So if I may offer instead, right? Instead of the question, how do we forgive this person who's done this great harm? If we can shift into a different set of transformative justice questions of like, not how can we hold this person accountable, or, sometimes, when we have so few options for healing that harm, it feels like something when punishment is offered as an option, because there's such a paucity of options. If that's all you have, it's natural that people gravitate to that. I don't judge people who do. I am very mad at certain people sometimes, but you have to create more options to break the cycles of harm. And so transformative justice and restorative practice asks a different set of questions. Rather than who can we punish, it's how do we make sure this never happens again? What do you need to heal? What do you need to heal? How can we as a loving community support you, embrace you, love you, so that you have what it takes to heal? What do you need to be? What do you need to feel safe? What do you need to feel safe? Let's do that. Let's focus on that. Oftentimes people do harms because they don't have access to safety. You know, they may steal, they may do different things because, again, no one enters violence for the first time through committing it. So there are cycles again. And so if we want to stop that, we have to ask questions of how do we prevent this from ever happening again? What are the resources we need in community? What are the safe spaces that we can have to heal, to repair?
And I add a little piece here too. And I want to thank you because Maria, you reminded me of a piece that my wife pointed out to me. I give my mother credit for all of the good things that have happened in my life. But one day I was doing that and my wife said, you need to credit your father too, because so much of who you are is in opposition of who he was. So what do you learn from those who do wrong? And that was such a gift that she gave to me. If we don't learn from those situations that were negative, we're throwing away opportunities.
Ryan left a comment in the chat. Oof. I'm right there with you. Yeah. So I just stole a peek at the clock, and I regret that we don't have hours and hours to lead into this. There are 3 things on my mind right now. I want to hear Hsiao-Wen's plant rooted story. I also feel that we've talked about what love means to us, what it means to lean into redemption and accountability and forgiveness. And Maria, I'm left thinking about sort of the paucity of options to metabolize what that harm or hurt to get us to a place of forgiveness, how we can create and lean into different options. But there is that immediate option that in some ways we have to acknowledge and move past. But I'm not sure we've talked about how to receive love yet. And I think love is the giving, but also being able to receive. So this is somewhat a choose your own adventure, Hsiao-Wen, because I know that one of our earlier thoughts was around what does love look like in action to you, which I think some people already touched on. So if you want to expand on that, and I hope to hear the plant story, or if you want to talk about how you receive love or think about receiving love, please share that. But Hsiao-Wen, I'd love to start with you, please.
I guess I'm taking a few seconds to receive that love, Hamida. Because it does feel to me that I was seen by you, that you remembered my story about the plant. So I'm receiving that love, and I will share my story about the plant. And I'll start by, so I mentioned to you about the grasping things by the root. So I want to share with you how I came to become a US citizen, because that then is my root in this country. And so I mentioned to you that I came to this country in 1995. And then long story short, fast forward, I got my green card in 2008. I knew that I had to wait 5 years to be eligible to apply to be a US citizen. So I waited. And in 2013, I went to the website to look at the application to become a US citizen. There was a nice 20 pages of it, and there was 18 parts. And after they ask the basic information, your education, your job, your marriage, your family history, here comes part 12 that has 5 pages and 50 questions. And of all those questions, they ask about, my heart is pounding right now. They ask about whether you've been a member of the Communist Party, Nazi military. Have you persecuted, involved in genocide, torture, killing, police unit, vigilance unit, rebel group? Have you ever been a habitual drunkard, being a prostitute, sold illegal drugs, gambled illegally? And words like removed, excluded, deported, crime, it was just sprinkled all over those 5 pages with those 50 questions. They ask if I have ever helped any group, unit, or organization that used a weapon against another person. The answer is no. Did I sell, give, provide weapons to any person? Help any person sell, give, or provide weapons to anybody else? No. Did I ever receive any type of military or weapons training? No. What was interesting to me is the last 3 questions, number 48. If the law requires you, are you willing to bear arms on behalf of the United States? If the law requires, are you willing to perform non-combatant services in the US Armed Forces? Number 50, if the law requires, are you willing to perform work of national importance under civilian direction? That was such a drastic contrast. I had to say no to all those questions about weapons and harm and violence. But the last 3 questions that ask me if I'm willing to do that. I closed the web browser on 2013 when I was eligible to apply for citizenship. This stopped me. I did take a deep breath and think about, so there's part 18, which is about oath of allegiance. They ask me if I'm willing to swear on this oath. And again, that I need to swear that I'm willing to bear arms. So those 48, 49, 50 shows up again. I knew that my hand could not move the mouse to click on yes on those questions. So I felt like I would be dishonest if I move forward with the application. And I don't want my first contact of being a citizen of the United States to be based on lies and dishonesty, since speaking truth is my love language. So I thought about, this is for you to know, 18 years of being in the country. I know enough about what the history of this country, what it was founded on. Tons of shit also happened to me as a queer Asian person. The violence that I witnessed, the discrimination that I experienced, I thought about, how do I honestly say that I love this country enough that I'm willing to swear and pledge allegiance? So I walked away from the website for a good 3 years. I gave myself that time to think about what love looks like. And I dug deep, go back to the roots. I also asked friends who had gone through this process. They said, oh, Hsiao-Wen, you're 40-year-old something. They're not gonna ask you to bear arms. So just click yes. I got that too. So I thought about how The allegiance really is about love for this country. And that is one version of some people think that what love looks like for this country. So what's my version of it? So again, I go back to my definition. Love that supports, nurtures, heals. So I wrote an oath of allegiance for myself. And that is what it is, that I vow and pledge allegiance to take care of the land and the sentient beings on this land and take only what I need. I honor those who lived and worked on this land and took care of this land before me. I'll defy the lie of the inferiority of people of color and superiority of white people. I vow to dismantle white supremacy and embrace the historical truth. And I will make emotional and spiritual healing a priority. And that's how I am coming in to love this country. And I submit the application in 2017 and become a US citizen on December the 11th. And I continue to take that plant, that seed, and I continue to live that way every day in my life in Ann Arbor, where I consider my home. So thank you for allowing me this opportunity to share this love plant that I grew and still nurture.
Hsiao-Wen, thank you for gifting us the chance to learn about your love plant. I want to offer Maria or Dwight 1 or 2 minutes to share any other things you're holding. Then we'll move over to what you invite us to do.
In a minute, which is hard to do, but in a minute. I was moving from Maine and with my ex-wife, and I had a youth group that I had started there. And one of the young girls, she's now a retired professor, but she said to me, "Can we help you? How can we help you?" I said, "Oh, we got it. Don't worry about it." And she said, "You are always giving us love, but you won't accept love from us." That was in 1973. She taught me what love was. Because if you want to let other people love you, you really don't even have a right to give them love. So I accept love wherever it comes, whether it's from a baby or it's from an adult. And I try to remind myself, when I was sick, I just had a long battle with bladder cancer. I got about 30 different cards from people as well as other things. I use those cards as bookmarks because I'm reading about that number of books to remind me, these people, this is love. And I need to be willing to accept it all the time, all day long, not just give it.
I'll say just really quickly, Hsiao-Wen, thanks for sharing that story. And, thanks for coming up with that beautiful alternative to the questions asked. Like what would allow you to move in your truth towards more healing and more liberatory futures rather than the questions that were asked, which seems like they're saying you must, in order to fill out this application, reject joining or having joined any freedom struggles or survival even, right? Sex work, all of these people who have been excluded. We don't want any of you. You have to reject having been part of any other country and having engaged in these things. But they're also saying, and you must say yes to supporting empire and joining imperial militaristic struggles, which is just I appreciate you just naming the stark contrast between those two and to have one follow the other, right? Like that's what's being asked. I'm not a citizen, by the way, so but I'm very familiar with these kinds of questions. Yeah. Thank you for that reorientation is all I'll say. I just and thank you for the truth telling that is, I'm growing to learn a unique gift that you have in your expression of love, Hsiao-Wen.
And I receive it gracefully, Maria.
Thank you all so much for our conversation today. And we'd like to close our conversation with invitations to us, to our audiences, to the folks in the virtual room. What do you ask of us? What do you ask us to do, think, feel? What do you invite us to do?
I'll jump in. I have a lot of ideas, but I'd like to just start with a little story. I think there's so much power in story, and I also want to bring one of my dearest friends into this space, Snigdha Shri Manikyavel, who lives in Chennai, where both of us used to work. Snigdha is an old friend, and one of the invitations is around what risks are you willing to take in service of your values. And I want to tell a little story about my friend Snigdha that encapsulates this, I think. So Snigdha and I used to work in a shelter in South India for homeless women. And we were just out of college when we took that job up. And she has taught me a lot about love. But suffice to say, after many years or a few years of working there, we were burnt out. We did a few different things. And part of Snig's journey was she joined a bank for a couple of years, okay? And which is, it's hard to even imagine her in that kind of position, knowing what I know of her, but she would, I forget the name of the bank. I think it was HSBC or some big multinational conglomerate. But after her first month of working there was a staff meeting and everyone was called. And the bank manager and all of these employees in Snigdha were there, and they were going over figures from the last month. And there are these various charts that say so many loans were approved and so many fees were waived. And all of these things that banks do, the way they offer limited options to those who are already marginalized, right? They replicate power structures, they deny people access to needed resources, they put people in debt. There are all of these things. But anyway, they were looking at this chart together, and when it came to fees waived, everyone was, all of the employees had like a pretty standard chart. Snigdha's was an outlier. Hers was like, completely off the charts. When it came to, what loans were forgiven, again, like Snigdha didn't know that all of her stuff was being tracked. Everyone else's numbers were pretty standard. And again, like you could tell who Snigdha was and what she was doing, because again, clearly everything had been forgiven. And I don't think she was able to hold that job for very long. She was shown the door pretty quickly, but in that time there, in that very unlikely space, she was making creative, generative possibilities for people and doing it with a lot of joy. And so the manager goes, I work for this bank, okay? Who do you work for? And that to me was just a perfect encapsulation of maybe what I'm inviting you to do, is to ask yourself, who do you work for? Who are you and whose are you? Because Snigdha was able to come into that space and still do some really radical things. So I invite you to think about the risks that you're willing to take in service of your values, like my friend Snigdha. And I'll share some other commitments and invitations. Mariam Kaba's 9 Solidarity Commitments is one of my favorites. This is 9 Solidarity Commitments to and with incarcerated people. I'll drop the Mia Mingus tool about accountability and some opportunities for offering resources if you have them to freedom work, liberation work, healing work, and welcoming displaced folks in our community as well. And I also share, and this is the last thing I'll share in the links, is this idea that all of our co-struggle and this work we're doing together has to be rooted in love, study, and struggle. So we've been talking about love. We will be struggling together, but I think collective study is another part of what helps us to be stronger in our movement. So I'll drop some links for that too. But thank you for the opportunity to share and invite.
Could I share a quick story too? And I thank you. Coming after you, you remind me of a lot. I used to have a radio program when I was assistant chaplain at Oberlin College, and it was over at midnight. So one night, and I was also the dormitory director of the largest dorm. One night it's snowing. I'm coming home from my radio show, and I saw a young white man, try to get into the building, but he couldn't because it was after midnight. The door had been locked. He walks past me. He did not tell me the door was locked, and I didn't tell him I had the key. We were both wrong. So I'm calling myself out, as I have done many times in sharing this story. So many times we know a door is locked and we don't call somebody out and tell them that. If you think that you know what is the best way to do something, you have a responsibility out of love. If you're going to live that love, you have a responsibility to say, you know, that's not going to work. That's not what love looks like. But anyway, I'll stop.
Here's my invitation to you, that I invite you to take out a piece of paper and write down verbs that is love to you. And then you will read the list on a regular basis and pick out a few verbs to do as a way of loving yourself and extend that to others in the community and in our country.
Maria, Dwight, Hsiao-Wen, thank you so much for helping us think, inspiring us around love and giving, forgiving, and receiving. Yodit, do you have anything you'd like to add? I invite you to add anything you might want to add.
Just deep gratitude. I feel like each of you, particularly you, Hsiao-Wen, you, in your offering, you exposed me to something I hadn't heard or seen before. And it reminded me of how seductive white supremacy, how seductive compliance with systems of dominance and extraction are, how entangled they are even to our humanity, our existence, our place, you know, our home, our sense of connectedness. And you're witnessing, in terms of even sharing your vow, shifted something for me, and I hope for others. And Maria, you, as you always do, invite new paradigms, new, you know, like not of trying to reform or fix what we have been taught, but to shed it in favor of completely new ways of being in relationship with words, even like forgiveness or accountability. Thank you And that is love, right? That's that courage that my daughter taught me, right? To move beyond even what we believe we know, to new rememberings that existed before these systems we were brought into. So I feel full, as I often do at the end of Centering Justice. I feel seen by all of you who tangled with this complex topic of just and radical love. And I feel surrounded, deeply held, if you will, in the light of your wisdoms and sharing today. And I know that I speak for everyone with us. So thank you. Thanks so much. We always ask, Hamida does, that people give us feedback because we are co-creating Centering Justice always in community. And so please take a moment, if you will, to complete the survey, the feedback tool, and Carly will send that out along with all of the resources that were shared today. And Hamida and Carly, thank you. It's always, these sessions always exceed what we could have conceived of, but I love being in study and struggle with you all. Thanks everyone for joining.